In this lesson, I'd like to take you through a little bit of an introduction to the concept of live tiles. Now, live tiles on the Windows Phone platform is definitely one of the more unique features that you're not going to find anywhere else, and which automatically makes it pretty cool and pretty interesting for you to be able to use to give more appeal to your application, ultimately to the end user. So what's a live tile, and what's a tile for that matter? Well, within the Windows Phone platform, all of the icons or images that you see within your screen are considered tiles. Now, we touched on this briefly in one of the early lessons when we discussed the layout of a Windows Phone 8.1 project structure layout, and we'll touch on that again briefly, but these things that you see on the screen, these are all tiles, and there's different sizes, and they're all doing different things. Some of them are static, as you see around the outside here. They're not really doing anything. Others have a mind of their own. Some of them may cycle through images or show a different piece of an image, and then ultimately once it gets to the end of that photo, it's going to flip to another one, and it's going to show you a different image, just like that. Now, you're also going to see in the people tile here that there seems to be about 9 sub squares in here, which ultimately allow you to see the faces and images associated with different people that you are associated with on, say, social networks or something along those lines. So this is what's considered a live tile. The movement here is what's making this a live tile. Now, this is definitely a good opportunity for you to take advantage of this to really make your application stand out. So how do you do that? Well, from Windows Phone 7 to 8 and then to ultimately 8.1, the paradigm for interacting with live tiles or making your tile live has definitely changed a little bit, and you're going to have to get used to it all over again, but ultimately it's for the purpose of bringing Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 together in this concept of Windows RT and making the development experience very similar so you don't have to learn different processes in order to do similar things. So let's see how to work with these live tiles. So I'm going to stop debugging here. Now, once again, as a bit of a reminder, if you open up your app manifest file here, you're going to see this kind of GUI screen that's going to give you a lot of information about your app. Now, there's a couple things to note here. If we switch over to Visual Assets, on the left-hand side, you're going to see a list of the image assets associated with your application. So the first thing you're going to see here is Tile Images and Logo. Now, these are the default tiles or images for the tiles that are going to be within your application. So when you first run it, you're going to see this particular X image show up on your screen, and you have different sizes of it depending on the different sizes of the logo or tile that appear on your screen, because remember, as I said, they can change in size from being very small to quite large. So by default, the 71 by 71, 150 by 150, and the other ones are all this same, just X. Now, these are all contained within our assets folder by default, and you can assign these via this GUI. Now, once you've done that, though, you don't get any sort of live tileness, if you will. You have to do that programmatically. So in my application here, I have a very simple XAML page. I have a stack panel that contains a single button that's horizontally centered, that has a name, it has a click event associated with it, and the content or the words on the button say Enable Live Tile. So what we want to do is to enable live tiles, or enable our tile to be able to cycle through different images or something along those lines. And now I'm going to show you the process to make this live tile flip and show different images, but ultimately you have a whole lot of different opportunities to do different things when it comes to playing around with live tiles. So if you go out to the internet and you check out msdn.microsoft.com and take a look at the tile template catalog, this site or this page ultimately is going to show you all of the different tiles that you have access to on both Windows and Windows Phone. Now, not all of these tiles are going to be accessible to you on both of those platforms, and it will show you which ones aren't. But this is just going to give you examples. So the tile square 150 by 150 image, which is ultimately a very simple one to work with, is just going to show an image. And now if you were to scroll down, you get some very different ones where we have a peak image and text 1, so we can assign both an image and some text to it, and it will ultimately scroll through these things or flip to show you the front and the back. Same with other instances down here, and you can see what they're going to look like. And here's an example that looks very similar to what we saw on the emulator a few moments ago, where we have a series of images or an image collection that's associated with these. Now, one other thing that you can do is you can grab the title of this, copy it, and if you search for this, it's going to take you down to the bottom where you're actually going to see the XML that's associated with this. Now, this name, this title wide 310 by 150 image collection, is actually an enumeration that lives within the Windows Phone platform that you can then say, I want to use that particular template. It's going to pull up the XML that's going to look like this into your application, and then you can use XPath queries or whatever you feel most comfortable with to grab either this image or some other text, depending on the other templates that you use, and update them with your source images or your text. And this process is going to be very common regardless of what tile you're using or what type of template you're using. So definitely bookmark this, the tile template catalog, on msdn.microsoft.com. So let's head back over to our application and let's take you through a very simple example. So now within my assets folder, I've added two images. I've added an image 1, which is merely a blue square, and image 2, which is a red square. So what I want to do is I want to swap out what the default source is for my live tile, or for my tile template, and replace it with these two images and ultimately make that tile flip and become live. So I'm going to switch over to my code behind file, and this is where I'm going to start to do the work with this concept. So really what we're going to do here is we're going to work with a couple different classes that's ultimately going to manage this for us. So the first one we need to know about is the Tile Update Manager. So this is kind of what's going to allow you to dip into that world of live tiles and the updating of those tiles. And you're going to see us using this Create Tile Updater for application quite a bit. So this is going to give us an actual updater that we can use to update our tile. So the first thing you're typically going to want to do is you're going to want to call the clear method. So this is going to clear out any sort of thing that was going on with that particular updater, either previously or if you were using it before. So that's always a good practice. So then we're going to stick with our Tile Update Manager, and now what's going to allow us to cycle through different images is what's known as a notification queue. So we're going to go ahead and call Create Tile Updater for application again, which is going to give us our updater. And this time, what we want to do is we want to enable a notification queue. And for this, we're going to set whether or not it's enabled, and that's going to be set to true. So this is ultimately what's going to make us able to update our tile. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to grab a reference, or actually grab the XML that's associated with the particular tile template that we want to use. So we'll say var tile XML, and that's going to be equal to the Tile Update Manager. There he is again. And now we want to get template. We want to get the template content for a particular template type, as you see here. So we can dig into the tile template type. In this case, we're going to keep it relatively simple, and we're just going to grab the tile square 150 by 150 image. And once again, you can grab any one that you would like, but I know in this case there's an image in here which we can modify the source of and make its source equal to our images here. So now we have that particular XML. We want to get the image element out of that XML so that we can modify it to be our images. So we'll say var tile image is going to be equal to the tile XML, and then we're going to use get elements by tag name, and we're going to say we want the image, and I know there's only one within this template, and then once we have that, we want to transform that or cast that as an XML element. So once we've done that, we can then grab the source attribute, the SRC attribute of that image element, and then we can start to modify it. So I'm going to say the tile image, we want to set an attribute, and that attribute is SRC for source. And now we need to give it a location. We need to give it a value. Now I'm going to use a syntax here that's specific to Windows Phone and Windows Phone 8.1, that's going to be the way that you can reference different assets within your project. And it has a prefix here of ms.appx. Now this prefix is going to allow us to dig into the project data structure to actually get information out or to get assets out. We have to make sure we put in 3 slashes just simply because that's the convention that's used for this particular method of grabbing assets or grabbing resources or grabbing files out of our project structure. Now these are going to be in the assets folder, and I want to specify this to be image1.png, just like that. So now we've set the source attribute of the image element within our tile square 150 by 150 image template. So once we've done that, now what we want to do is we want to create a notification or a tile notification that we can ultimately send out into our notification queue to let our tile know that it needs to update. So we're going to create a tile notification, and we're going to set that equal to a new instance of the tile notification class, and this is going to take in an XML document, and that is exactly what the tile XML is that we've been using up here. So now that we've got that in there, we're now going to pass that notification into our tile update manager. So now we can say create tile update for application, and now we want to use the update method, and we're going to pass in our notification. So by doing this now, we're notifying our application or the tile that it needs to actually update. But it doesn't stop there. You can, since this is a queue, this is a notification queue, you can continue to add images to this queue and it's ultimately going to update. Or you can continue to add templates to this update and it's going to continue to cycle through them. Now I believe the limit on Windows Phone 8.1 is actually 5, so the limit of the amount of items or notifications that you can put into the queue is 5, but that should be more than enough for you to actually get this to work. So now I want to set this, or I want to update this with my image 2. So I'm going to grab the line here where I'm setting the attribute, so I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to drop down, and this time I want to set this to image2.png. Then I'm going to set my tile notification equal to another new tile notification, and this is once again going to be the tile XML. And then we can once again call our tile update manager to actually update our tile. And that should be sufficient. So now we'll go ahead and save this. So ultimately what our application is going to do is, this is a little bit contrived. We're going to click our button, which is ultimately going to drive this. Now typically what you're going to do is probably create some sort of background information, or maybe listen for some sort of notification and allow those notifications to update your tiles, as clicking on a button to enable this is a little bit hokey, but in a real world example, you're probably going to have some other process that's going to be driving updates to your tiles. So let's go ahead and hit F5 to run our application. So once our application starts up, you're going to see that I have my button here, but I don't really have anything on my start screen yet. So that's where you're really going to notice the live tiles. So if I come in here and scroll to the bottom, there's nothing here yet. So if I click this little right arrow or I drag from right to left, it's going to take me to where it has all of the applications. Now my application is called Live Tile, so if I come down here, I can hold this down, and I'm going to be given the option to pin this to start. So I'm going to pin it to start, and here's that default icon again that's associated with our application. And as you can see, it's not doing anything yet, and it's just that default image, it's not changing. So if I go ahead and run my application, and I click my button and enable Live Tile, my code here is then executed, creating that notification queue and then passing these tile images into that notification queue and calling update. So now if I go back to my start menu and I go down to the bottom, you're going to see that my Live Tiles application is now red, and after some period of time it's going to flip and turn to the other image. Now that's pretty nifty with only a little bit of code and having to work through a little bit of XML here to actually get that to work, but it's a very cool feature, and since you have so many of those really cool templates to work with, you can really let your imagination run wild with how you want to update this with different images, with different text, and really make it a very cool experience for your end users to see some live updates going on within your tile.